Thea, thank you very much. Welcome to First and 10. And to say we've got a busy Monday morning ahead of us, guys, I think is a bit of an understatement. Good weekend for both?
I just spent the weekend trying to catch up with Skip. Let's move on.
And he's still
for those of you that understand that, if you watch Friday, you probably know what that means.
You should watch every day.
Woody Page and Skip Bayless are here for our look at the 10 biggest stories in the world of sports. And we have to start, of course, with the brawl in Detroit Friday night involving the Indiana Pacers, the Detroit Pistons, and their fans. No doubt you've seen the video. The trouble began late in the fourth quarter. Pacers were on their way to an easy win when Ron Artest fouls Ben Wallace. Wallace takes exception, shoves Artest. It appeared that things would end right there. But as Artest is lying on the scorer's table, watch as something is thrown from the stands, lands on Artest's chest. That enraged Ron Artest, and he jumps into the stands, bolts after some of the fans.
The guy with the white cap is actually the one who threw the beer.
There is a lot of talk that you're absolutely right. The guy with the white cap actually lands a sucker punch on another one of the players. And then Artest towards one of the Pistons fans. Why that guy was on the court, it's yet to be determined. And then in comes Jermaine O'Neal. And the really scary part, when the guys are leaving the court, objects are thrown, beer, Coke, soda. It is a terribly ugly scene. Now, yesterday, Commissioner David Stern handed out the suspensions, and the Pacers were crushed. Ron Artest, done for the rest of the year. Steven Jackson, out for 30 games. Jermaine O'Neal will sit 25 games. Anthony Jackson, 5. Reggie Miller even suspended for a game. Meanwhile, here are the disciplined Pistons. Ben Wallace gets 6 games. Chauncey Billups, Derek Coleman, and Eldon Campbell all hit with 1-game suspensions. Ron Artest offered this reaction. In a statement, he said, quote, "I have total respect for all of the players who play the game, and I respect David Stern, but I don't think he has been fair with me in this situation," end quote. Woody, very stiff punishments. Do they fit the crime?
Well, you guys know that I have been talking about the Artest case for several weeks, and I sound almost like a broken record, but I finally was proven correctly. I told you he needed psychological help. He does have psychological problems. If this doesn't prove it, I don't know what will. Does the fine fit the punishment? Here's what I would have done. I would have suspended him indefinitely while he got psychological treatment, while he sat down with doctors, while he maybe even committed himself to a hospital, and have him reevaluated from time to time. And when the doctors and when the team and when the league felt like it was appropriate for him to come back, that's the way it should have been done. Instead, you suspend him for a year, he'll go off and he'll deal with his rap records, he'll lay on the beach, he will not get the kind of psychological help he needs. Remember Billy Martin? I talked to you about Jimmy Pearsall. Billy Martin, I think everybody knows, he was a basket case. Let's face it, guys, there was a guy that needed help and didn't get it. Artest is a guy that is reaching out. He's trying to say to people, please help me. Please help me. Instead, they suspend him for a year. That will not do any good. What you do is you make him go to psychiatrists.
But by his standards, what he did when he went into the stands was not nearly severe enough to merit a whole year's suspension. I don't care what you say, and I agree with all your point. I hope he does use this time to get help. But this was the commissioner sending an early message before the appeals process starts that I'm going to regain control of my game.
If it's anyone other than Ron Artest, is it a season?
Absolutely not. I sat in Wrigley Field just 5 years ago, and I watched 7 Los Angeles Dodgers pile into the stands after Chad Kruger's hat, which had been plucked off his head in the bullpen, and they engaged in a haymaker throwing contest with 5 or 6 fans that would have shocked everyone in this room and everybody watching way more than what you saw from Artest. By his standards, Woody, I thought he was restrained once he figured out that was the wrong kid. That kid didn't throw the beer.
Woody told us what he would do if he were commissioner. He'd make sure that Artest get help. What would your suspension be? What's fair in this case?
30 games for Artest.
30 games?
But I totally agree now.
But how does that deal with his problem?
It doesn't. That's a whole other issue, Woody.
Skip, over the past 3 years, I think he's been suspended about 88 games. I'm saying about.
This is his
exactly
7th suspension.
88 games. And if you include the 73, and he's again proving over and over again that he's a man who's troubled. I don't know any other way to put it. He needs Barrett Robbins. I go back to him in the Super Bowl. It got completely out of hand. That's what we saw here. Here is a man that's suffering from anti-depression or bipolar problems. He needs, and I'm not a doctor, but he needs help. And by just saying we're suspending you without giving him help, Gosh,
but the reason he got a year's suspension wasn't because of Friday night. It was because of 3 years of erection.
Yeah, and David Stern even said he took into consideration the fact that he had been suspended 6 times previously. You can't talk about this issue without talking about the fans and the responsibility that they share. The situation escalated when Ron Artest was hit by the object from the stands. That can't be ignored. His reaction certainly wasn't good, but the fans certainly seemed willing to get involved. Jermaine O'Neal's punch happened on the court, which begs the question, what was the fan doing on the court in the first place? David Stern spoke about the fans' conduct and how the league will deal with it.
We must redefine the boundaries of acceptable conduct for fans attending our games and resolve to permanently exclude those who overstep those bounds. Quite simply, participants in and around the court must be assured complete protection from unacceptable fan behavior.
All right. In theory, it sounds like an easy thing to do. How do you, A, identify these fans? How do you deal with them? The commissioner can't suspend them. What do you think of his comment?
Let's talk about what happened that was really shocking here, Woodrow, and that was what happened on the court after what happened in the stands. That's what knocked me out of my chair. Check this out. Artest engaging with this fan, and then another fan grabs him around his legs, and then here comes Jermaine O'Neal flying headlong in, almost a Kermit Washington-style punch of this guy. And if they said one fan went to the hospital, it must have been with this guy. But we have seen in baseball and other sports where fans have gone on the field. We had the White Sox incident where 2 wackos ran after and jumped on the first base coach, Tom Gamboa, at White Sox Park. And baseball players have said, from henceforth, if you cross the white line, you are fair game, meaning you're going to get hurt. Those fans, those 2 guys, crossed the line. They were in the court of play. I think they're fair game, and that's why, again, too harsh for Jermaine O'Neal. He got 25 games for throwing a punch in defense of Ron Artest, who had been challenged by the other guy's buddy head-to-head and throwing punches at him. So why would he get suspended for defending Artest against a guy? God forbid, what if he'd had a gun? What if he'd had a knife? That didn't happen, but it will at some point.
Fan is short for fanatic, and these are not even fanatics, they're lunatics. You mix young men and alcohol, and you have a volatile problem. We see it after teams win championships. We've seen it in baseball, as you pointed out, seen it in hockey. I wrote about the fans in St. Louis a couple of years ago, pouring beer and boxes and everything else all over the head of a goaltender for the Avalanche that was rather well known, Patrick Waugh, after he won a big game. I saw it in Denver, and I wrote about the fact that the fans were throwing those plastic beer bottles and hitting kids when they were trying to hit the opposing players on the ice. Let me point specifically. Detroit has a history of this, but other cities do. But in Detroit, you can buy one of those tickets where those guys were sitting for $365. I don't know where these lunatics get that money. Maybe their companies give it to them. Maybe they save up the money. Maybe they just came down and sat on $365. You know what you get with that? Unlimited drinking. You get as much beer and wine as you want to. 90 minutes before the game, you can go to a club room and drink your ass off, forgive me. Then you can sit in the stands and you can drink and drink and drink. What in the world is that all about?
Well,
That's what's going to end up
So how
happening.
much responsibility do the Pistons and their management take in this?
Well, it shows about sports. That is true in all of sports. If you want to just fill up people with wine and alcohol and beer and mixed drinks, that's what you're going to get. There's got to be some controls, and it's got to be more than we're going to stop beer sales at the end of the 7th inning or at the end of the second period.
All right, much more on that in just a bit. First, we want to talk about the Pacers and their future. And welcome back to First and 10. Woody Page and Skip Bayless. And we've run through 6 topics already. We have 4 to go. 3rd and 4. The magic of 3rd and 4. 1st and 10. I guess we're gonna stay at 1st and 10. There we go. 3rd and 4. And we head back to the topic that has so dominated our morning and really news coverage everywhere you look. Pacers-Pistons fight from Friday. Are you with me? You ready to go, Woody?
Pages of the New York Times. You know it's got to be a big story.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of the questions that have been raised all over ESPN and other media outlets since Friday is safety at sporting events. Clearly, the security at the Palace of Auburn Hills was insufficient. One of the questions we asked on our website is, Do you feel safe at sporting events these days? And the results are in. 79% of you said yes, you do. But I guess you can focus in on the 21% of those that responded say they do not feel safe. Skip, I'll ask you. Do you feel completely safe when you go to a sporting event?
I'm very surprised at our poll because...
Surprised which way?
I don't feel safe.
Yeah.
And again, I think Woody would be the same way. I rarely go to a game when I don't sit in the confines of the press box. But to me, Woody, as you brought out in the earlier in the show, way too much alcohol sold.
Next up, the response by the NBA Players Association. Executive Director Billy Hunter called the suspensions, quote, egregious and will appeal the harshest penalties. Skip, should Players Association even fight this?
Absolutely, they should fight it because the commissioner right now is just playing to the crowd. He's telling people what they want to hear because they're so shocked and amazed by the video we've seen until our stomachs turn. But seriously, step back from it. Did Ron Artest throw haymakers when he went into the stands? No. Should he have gone in? Absolutely not. That was the very first mistake made. Steven Jackson rushes to his aid because it looks like he's in trouble in the stands. Should he be suspended for 30 games? It's way too harsh. And Jermaine O'Neal took a flying leap and delivered a potential kill shot to a fan who, for all he knew, was about to jump on Ron Artest again.
What was Artest doing in the stands?
Well, again, he thought somebody hit him.
Why
with
was
the
he
beer.
in the stands?
Well, he shouldn't have gone. I said that was the first
doing
mistake.
in the stands. He should be suspended for a year. You've got to prove something to the players. And I say this again, he's a man who really needs psychological help. But any player that goes into the stands gets what he deserves in terms of suspension.
Well, I agree
any fan that comes onto the field to play.
Let me ask you this, Woody. Is there anything a
City.
fan can do to a player that would excuse a player from going after him? Because you're almost giving them now an unlimited license to do whatever they want.
You've got to turn the other cheek. If you were a player, there's no reason for you. You stop and you get security people and you say, that's the guy who did it, or you walk off the court, your team refuses to play the game. There are all sorts of other outlets than to just respond with violence. There's no reason for it. You walk away, you figure out a way to deal with it, but that's not the way. Does it come to Mexico City? If you've been to the stadium down there where they have a moat around the stadium, they have barbed wire fence around the soccer field.
But I thought the fans'
I think
reaction...
there should be commissions to sit down